Danny Katz here with CoPerg, and very excited to talk about Denver's composting recycling program with the expert, Nina Waisdorf from the Denver Department of Transportation and Infrastructure. Hi. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Love talking about recycling and composting. My
I would
favorite
hope,
subject.
yeah, I would hope so.
Yeah,
So can you just tell us a little bit about your role, kind of where are you in the composting recycling world?
sure, absolutely. So I work in solid waste management in the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure. So we are the residential waste haulers for the city. So if you live in a single family home or a small multifamily building up to 7 units, we come and pick up your trash recycling and compost and run a bunch of other programs as well. And I'm the waste diversion and recycling manager for the division. So my team focuses on educating our customers in the community about all things are related to our services and just waste diversion more generally, and really trying to engage and educate people about how to divert waste from their household and maybe at work and beyond. And we run a few other special programs as well, like other seasonal diversion programs, special events, stuff like that.
Great. All right. Well, then you're the right person to talk to if we want to dig into, being master composters and recyclers here. So I guess the first thing to highlight is that sort of good news, the compost program is being expanded here in the city of Denver. Can you just tell us a little bit more about who will now have access to curbside composting and when people can expect to see that kind of rolled out?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, this is for our customers. So if you are in a single family home or one of those multifamily buildings, so duplex, triplex, quadplex, I don't know if that's a thing, but up to 7 units, then you will start getting compost rolled out here shortly. So we started January 1st or so, rolling out weekly recycling. So folks previously had every other week pickup for recycling. Now people have weekly recycling. And then beginning in July, we're going to start rolling out compost in phases to the rest of our customers. And that'll be weekly pickup. So currently we have about 30,000 compost customers who had signed up for the compost subscription program before we switched over to this expanded waste services program. So all those people, nothing's changed for them, still have weekly compost. But then beginning July, we'll start phasing it in for the rest of our 150,000 or so customers. So quite a big jump from 30,000 to 180,000. So we're going to be doing it in phases. We have the city broken up into collection districts, and we'll be going district by district until we get through the whole city. It'll be a couple months per district because we want to let our services grow into the program. So make sure our routes are going well, our drivers know where to go. We have the trucks and the infrastructure to support. But we also really want to be able to kind of hold people's hand and educate them through learning into this program. For a lot of residents, compost is going to be a new service, and we don't want to just plop a new green cart on their doorsteps and tell them to figure it out. We want to make sure that people have the tools and the resources to compost correctly, and really be diverting their waste successfully.
What's the best way if I'm living in Denver and I want to know, kind of what the timeline is for my neighborhood where I fall in that district? Yeah. Is there a website that I can check out?
Yeah, so we'll be posting all of it to the expanded waste services collection page, so denvergov.org/expanded collection, and our compost page, so denvergov.org/compost is going to have like all things related to the compost service rollout. And residents won't have to sign up or anything. We're just going to automatically start the service, and we'll reach out directly to residents by district as we start rolling it out to their neighborhood. So they'll get some advance notice that compost is coming to them.
That sounds great. Okay. One reason that we're so excited, every year CoPerg, along with EcoCycle, does an annual report around recycling and composting, and our rates aren't particularly good overall as a state. And part of the problem is just literally access. So making it easy, making it possible for somebody to put something in a bin that goes right to their curb and gets picked up on a weekly basis. So it sounds like Denver's really building the right, groundwork, the right foundation to really improve those rates. But for composting in particular, I think we're particularly excited because when it comes to compost, things like organic matter, it just doesn't belong in landfills. And so this is a great way to divert what can be valuable. So, if you think of like an eggshell or an orange peel, that can actually be valuable because it can be turned into compost. And instead of taking up space in a landfill and requiring us to build more and more landfill space, we can divert that. We can reduce the amount of methane pollution that comes from those items when they're in those landfills, which is a big greenhouse gas driver. And we can take that, turn it into good compost. And, I've gotten into gardening recently, and everyone tells me if you want to be a good gardener, it's about your soil and the quality of your soil. Compost plays a huge role in this. And so it's really kind of a cool opportunity for those of us in Denver to see our food scraps and yard waste turned into the kind of thing that can bring resources and nutrients back into our soils and our parks and our gardens, and be able to actually be a climate solution, instead of creating methane pollution, actually pulling carbon out of the air. So it seems really exciting, but I guess, do you have any stats on sort of how big an impact our composting program has made so far, just with the 30,000 or so that you were describing earlier?
Yeah, we typically see about 12,000 tons going to be composted rather than landfilled from our 30,000 or so customers. So if we kind of continue on that trend of tonnage per household, we're estimating about 70,000 tons going to compost rather than the landfill a year. So that's huge. And, we estimate from, studying the waste stream, digging in the trash, that about 50% of residential waste tends to be compostable material. So we could really make a huge impact on what we're not sending to the landfill.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing to think about. Like, literally half of our waste that we just have kind of assumed would go to a landfill could actually be repurposed in a way that's good for our environment, that's good for our communities. So that's really great, and really excited to see Denver continue to grow this program. So then let's get into the nuts and bolts here. So if somebody is new to composting, what's the very basics you tell them? Like, what should be going in the green compost bins that Denver is now offering to more and more people?
Yeah. So the big things that we want to collect into those compost carts are food scraps and yard waste. Those are really, really high value materials in the compost stream. They create excellent compost, and really just do wonders for your garden, like you said. So those are the big things. And it's easy to remember food scraps, yard waste, right? Like if you can eat it or cook with it, it can go in your cart. We can take meat, dairy, bones, eggs, shells. If you forget about some leftovers in the fridge and they go bad, you can just throw those right in the cart. Anything edible or that was attached to something edible, I guess. I always say if it was edible, you can compost it, but you don't really eat pits and rinds, but you get the idea. And then yard waste too, anything that was growing. So, weeds can go in there. We can take leaves, branches, as long as they're cut down to the right size. We can take flowers, dead plants, I don't know, all of those things, grass clippings, that all makes really, really excellent compost.
That's great. And so if you're new, then that seems pretty easy to remember those two things. I've been a subscriber to the compost program for a while, so I actually had gotten in the habit of putting things like paper towels and Kleenex and compostable containers and other things in the bins. But I noticed that a lot of times I would stand in front of my bin and look at a food container, a to-go container I got from a restaurant. And sometimes it wouldn't be obvious if it was compostable or not. And so I'd be sitting there going, well, and I don't see the compostable words, but it seems compostable. So I'd put it in there. And I've learned recently that that is a huge problem, and that ultimately all this compost is going to a giant facility. So the egg shells and the orange peels don't just automatically turn into compost. They have to go to an industrial facility that does the scientific process that breaks that down and turns it into actual soil and compost that we can use. And I realized that if you put things in your compost bin that aren't compostable, then all of a sudden that facility has some beautiful dirt with a plastic bag in it. And I know that if I was going to, a gardening store and I picked up a big bag of dirt and I got home and I realized there's plastic bags in it, I'd be pretty upset. And so it sounds like that facility was just experiencing too many times when things that weren't compostable were being put in that bin, that they've basically said, even though previously in Denver we could put some of those things in there, we're now saying we can't. Is that correct? I remember getting a notice in the mail about that.
Yeah, exactly. So we basically have scaled back what we want to put in those compost carts and focus on those really high value materials that are a little bit easier to differentiate between. Because you're right, there were, across the Front Range, there have been these higher levels of contamination stemming from those kind of look-alike confusing products. It is, perhaps intentionally confusing, trying to figure out what is compostable, what is recyclable, and more often than not, people with best intentions will contaminate the compost or the recycling bin because it's just too confusing to tell. So we're really scaling back across the Front Range to make sure that we're just composting what we know and are confident is compostable, so that we don't contaminate that facility, we don't contaminate our streams, and really trying to focus on helping people to understand that what goes into those compost carts does become this really helpful soil amendment. But because it is going into our gardens, we don't want non-compostable, non-organic material in there, right? So if we put glass or plastic in our compost bins, then there's a chance that we could be putting glass and plastic into our gardens. And that's not what we want. So we're really just trying to focus on those big high value materials that really get the good stuff and eliminate the confusion until we can across the board be more confident that what it says compostable is actually compostable.
Absolutely. And I remember when I got the notice in the mail, it was disappointing. I get excited, that I'm getting a compostable container and not a plastic container. But then if I can't actually put the compostable container in the compost, then it does feel kind of silly to even go to that effort. However, I know from COPER's perspective, there are bills at the Capitol that are trying to get at this problem. So there's a bill right now that's requiring clearer labeling around compostable items. And I know the facility that takes the compost came and testified in favor of that and said it's those kinds of steps. If we can ensure that things that are compostable are truly, things that are labeled compostable or indicate some sort of green sustainable aspect, if those things can actually truly be compostable, then we can have more confidence and potentially get back to a world where we can collect more and more of those things in the city program. So hopefully there's an advocacy opportunity, and we'll make sure we put a link in the post that we'll do on this that if you're watching, you can help us ensure that we're trying to get back to a world where we can expand what can go in the compost bin. But for right now, it sounds like food scraps, yard waste, those are the two big things to be focused on right now. The one exception though, green bags. So we put our compost in the green bags. Can you just describe what's the requirement to make sure you get the right bio bag for your compost?
Yep, exactly. So we can take in our green carts, in our green compost carts and around the Front Range again, we can take 3-gallon or smaller CMA certified compostable bags. So the 3-gallon or smaller, that is basically your kitchen pail size. So if you have a countertop compost pail that you use to put your food scraps in as you're cooking, then you dump that into your compost bin, you can still line that with a compostable bag. That's the size we're looking for. And then the certification is Compost Manufacturers Alliance, or CMA is how it'll be written out. And that certification tells us that those bags have been field tested. So we are positive it'll break down in the field at the compost facility. So that's kind of like the gold standard for certification. And most of the major bag brands have that certification. So like your bio bags, EcoSafe, Eco Products, those ones. And our website has links to which bags are approved as well.
That's great. That's great. And then you mentioned, I've been composting for a few years now. You mentioned the pail, the smaller pail. I have one of those. And I know for people who probably, when I first started, I was worried it was going to be stinky or messy or whatnot. And I've been really pleasantly surprised. I mean, there's obviously a few simple things I do. I mean, one is, I take out, it's a small pail and it fills up, within a few days. So I just make sure I'm taking it out every couple of days. But the pail seems to work quite well. And I haven't really had too many problems. Do you all have any tips for people who are worried about, it's going to be stinky or it's going to attract bugs or anything like that?
Yeah, well, so those kitchen pails are great. They kind of like aerate it a little bit in the right way that reduces some of that that like ickiness.
Yeah.
And I always like to remind people that like you're not really creating new or different waste, right? You're just putting it in a separate place. So it's not like because you're starting to compost, you're all of a sudden going to have like this huge new icky waste stream. It's all stuff that was going in a different cart. You're just switching it around. So I try to like get people to reframe it a little bit. It's the same food you were using before. It's just in a different place. But for me personally, I put my compost in the freezer until it's ready to go into the cart. I never have any problems with smell. And then, you know, by the time it's collected, it's like thawed out in my cart. So that really works for me. We also recommend layering, you can like layer food waste in with your, or layer yard waste in with your food waste. So if you have some leaves or grass clippings, you can throw in between your food scraps. That'll help bring down any smells or bugs when it's outside in your cart. So those things like that really help. But it's really, you know, it's not so icky. And like you said, if you're taking it out regularly as it fills up, then you shouldn't really have any problems. And since it's being collected weekly, it really can't sit in there for too long before things start going bad.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to get into recycling since we have you, but is there any final things you want to say about composting? Any final tips or reminders for people?
Yeah, you know, I think you said it well. It's one of the best tools that we as individuals can take against climate change. You know, we all have trash, so we can all manage it a little bit better to reduce our impact. And you know, compost is so cool. The composting process is so cool because it creates this circular system where we really are putting materials back into the production cycle right here on the Front Range. It all happens locally, and it's so cool. It's like, in my eyes, it's a win-win. You know, we're reducing our landfill waste, but we're also helping our soils and our gardens and our farms. So it really is an easy way for people to take action individually.
That's great.
Big fan.
100% agree. Well, let's talk about being a master recycler. So there are days when I stand in front of my recycling bin and I feel like I need an advanced degree to understand kind of what I should be putting in there or what I shouldn't. And it took me a while to realize that it's not so much what's on the label of a product, you know, to determine whether it's recyclable or not. In this particular case, something is recyclable if it has value. So there's some entity out there that will buy it so we can actually turn it into something else. Otherwise, it's just going to landfill. And it's something that can be collected and sorted. So some items are either too small or too light or whatever to be collected and sorted. And so with that in mind, it feels even more complicated because it's hard for me to necessarily determine that. So I know you all have put a lot of thought into what are the things that you all can collect, can sort, and that there's value for. Somebody will buy it essentially from you or reuse it in some particular way. So I guess kind of take us through your ABCs of, you know, here are the things to think about when you're standing in front of your recycling bin, you know, what should be going in there.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, just like compost, it's easier to think about the big things, right? Like the big kind of hitters. You know, we don't have to all spend a million hours out of our day thinking about each individual little item. If you can remember kind of these big categories and help simplify it that way. So like aluminum cans, tin and steel cans. We can take aerosols in our carts. Those are empty aerosol cans. So not everyone can take those, but we can. Cardboard boxes, paper products, or, you know, office paper, junk mail, paperboard. So like a cereal box, we can take all of that stuff. And then for plastics, that's always the tricky one. Plastics are the most confusing because what does that little chasing arrow symbol even mean? Where do we start with that? So the big thing to remember with plastics is that we can take containers. So we can take 1 through 7 plastics as long as it's in a container form. So like a bottle, tub, jug, jar, those kind of containers, for, you know, lack of a better word.
Sure.
So that means that we can't take a plastic bag, styrofoam, plastic cutlery, or any kind of that like single-use plastic, right? You can't hold anything in a plastic fork. We don't want it in our recycling carts, even if it does have a number on it. So we're really focusing on those bottles, tubs, jugs, jars, that kind of thing.
And you said up front, you know, paper, cardboard, aluminum, I think glass as well, right?
Glass. Oh, glass, of course. How could I forget about glass?
No, it's fine.
We love glass.
We love glass. And then plastics.
Glass is recycled right here in Colorado.
Yeah, and so plastics. So tubs. Toothpaste tube. That's one that I get asked. It's kind of it rolls up. I'm assuming that doesn't count because it's not a container.
Typically, no, but we did just get word from our recycling facility that there's like one brand they can take. So I'll have to do some more digging onto that one. It's like,
Okay.
yeah, but typically anything like malleable, bendy, that kind of thing, we typically don't want that.
Okay.
So
Gotcha.
containers are the best like rule of, again, like thinking about those big categories.
Yeah. How clean do these things have to be? So I mean, yogurt, I get done. There's a little bit of yogurt in there. Peanut butter is probably the far extreme example.
Mhm.
It's pretty goopy still. There's still some stuff in there. So like, what should I be thinking about in terms of how clean does this need to be?
Yeah, I always tell people to just make sure it's empty. Make sure it's completely empty. Water is a precious resource in Colorado, so we don't need to use a ton of hot water to make sure everything is absolutely perfectly spick and span. The recycling process will take care of a lot of the residue, I guess, that like really lingering still like the peanut butter that really
Yeah.
just won't come out. So as long as it's empty, that's generally the good rule of thumb. Take a spoon and clear everything out. And then it's typically good. I like the example of a yogurt container. Like if you forget about a tub of yogurt in the fridge and it's completely full and it's gone bad, you can't just dump that in your
Yeah.
recycling bin. But you can empty it out, ideally compost that moldy yogurt you forgot
Yeah.
about.
Yeah.
But make sure it's really nice and empty, and then you can go ahead and recycle it.
I assume same with like, you have half a soda left in your soda bottle, pour the
Right.
soda out.
Pour it out,
in there.
recycle it. Yeah.
What about the caps? I mean, I've heard both. You'll keep the caps on, keep the caps off. They're pretty small. I assume it's kind of hard to collect and sort those. Is it better to just toss the cap, or is there what would you recommend there?
Yeah, it's better. Like ultimately, those bottle caps aren't like high value. They're not really, those little bottle caps aren't really going to get recycled. So if it's already unattached, throw it away in the trash can. If it's attached, then it can go in the recycling bin, but they really don't want loose bottle caps in the recycling. So if it's attached, you're good in the recycling. If it's unattached, just go ahead and throw it away.
What if the caps are kind of either more of a metal or tin quality? Is that valuable to put in the bin? Or
I would say it's not a perfect rule, but like if you're mixing materials, then it's typically best to separate it. So like if it's a glass bottle with a metal lid or a metal bottle cap, then it's best to like throw that lid away.
Throw the lid away. Don't put the lid in separately. Okay. Yeah. Gotcha. You mentioned this before, junk mail. So just to emphasize, like you get the envelope and it has that little plastic see-through piece to it.
That's fine.
That's fine. Okay. And
fine.
What about, if there's a staple or two that gets mixed in there?
Yeah, that's okay in the recycling.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
we can't take shredded paper in our recycling. We have single stream recycling throughout the Front Range, which means that, everything goes in one bin. We don't have to sort out paper from those cans and bottles and all of that stuff. So shredded paper really gets in absolutely everything. You really can't separate out each individual shred from the cans and the bottles. So we say no to shredded paper.
Yeah. Okay. So again, I think it's helpful to remember like this stuff's got to get somewhere. And so
lots of little scraps.
Like we don't have a bunch of people who can just, sort those things out.
Right.
I know these things don't go in a recycling bin, but I think there's ways to recycle them. So like electronics, batteries, light bulbs. I mean, there's kind of those items. They shouldn't go in the recycling bin. But are there ways in Denver for us to bring them somewhere or have them picked up?
Yes, there are. Yeah. So those items, you're right, should not go into our recycling. A lot of those things we don't want in our landfill either. Batteries can be, some of those special batteries can be unsafe in a landfill. Alkaline batteries are fine, but and electronics are actually illegal to put in the landfill in Colorado. There's a lot of hazardous material that's in some of our electronics, as well as a lot of recyclable materials. So we want to separate those ones out and have those be safely recycled. Denver has we have a bunch of different kind of hard to recycle programs, we call it. So we have a household hazardous waste pickup program, an electronics recycling coupon program, and some of our special event collection as well. So all of that is on the trash and recycling pages for the city. There's some, the household hazardous waste program has a small copay, but you get to put a lot of household hazardous waste in those bags. And it's a really great program that helps to store that material. There's also like free paint recycling throughout Colorado.
Right.
That's a great option. So there's a lot of programs on there, and it's all linked throughout our website.
Great. Are there any other pitfalls, or are there any other things that you you see in the recycling stream that just shouldn't be there, or simple tricks that we haven't talked about yet that we should remember?
Yeah, lots of thoughts. So I think the biggest contamination we see is plastic bags all the time. Plastic bags, people really have an understandable conception that if it's plastic, it's recyclable. But plastic bags we can never take in our recycling bins. Some film plastic can be recycled, but it has to be separated out going in. And the biggest problem is that those plastic bags get caught in the machinery at the recycling facilities. And it's like it can shut down the sorting facility or the sorting area. So we can never take that. It's considered contamination. Styrofoam too is another big contaminant that we see. We just don't recycle styrofoam. It's really not a good material for recycling.
Yeah.
So those are some of the pitfalls, but I think generally it's just, we like to say you should know before you throw. So we want to recycle and we want to compost as much as we can, but it's more important to do it right and to just recycle and compost the things that actually do go into those bins.
Yeah.
But people want to do the right thing. So sometimes we tend to throw things in that we're not sure about. And then that's actually contamination and it's like slowing down the process.
Yeah.
But there are a ton of tools out there. So we have a waste directory on our website. We also have the Denver Trash and Recycling app where you can search by material and it'll tell you which bin to put it in, or if there's a special collection program for it.
Yeah.
So it's really not, the answers are out there. It's not as hard as it seems, but we want people to know before they're throwing it in so that we're not sending contamination to our facilities.
Yeah. And I think we have to keep just remembering, like, yeah, it feels like, well, it's the right thing to do to put it in the bin, but ultimately all of that is going to a facility. And if that facility can't take it, if that item you put in there contaminates everything else around it, then you've actually impacted a lot more materials. And obviously the better our materials are in Denver, the more companies can come in and reuse them and recycle them. So it feels like, actually our goal should be to have the best recycling and the best composting from a quality perspective. And then hopefully that leads to us being able to then accept and take more. So that's the mindset I've tried to get more into, but certainly, as you said, it does take some work. And I think one thing we're excited about Colorado is going down a path of doing more to put some responsibility on the producers. There was a bill that passed last year that's going to start to look at ensuring that manufacturers of containers, of paper, of all this stuff will actually have to think about, are there things recyclable and how easy are they to be collected, sorted, and reused. So hopefully in 3, 4, 5 years, we'll actually have a system that's a little bit more streamlined, that's a little bit easier for all of us to understand and use. But for right now, it sounds like know before you throw, which sounds like a really good expression to remember. Is there anything else? Go ahead. Yeah,
I was just going to say too, again, we love recycling, we love composting, but waste production and reuse, that's always going to be the more sustainable option. And we want to set up the right systems for people to be able to divert the waste that they have. But it's a lot less confusing if you don't have to think about throwing it away at all.
Yes,
you don't have to keep track of what bin it goes into, right?
That's a great point. And reduce is the first R that we all use, reduce and then reuse and then recycle. So you're on the kind of, you're the backstop for all of us. And there's a lot more we can do on that reduction side. Anything else you want to highlight about the recycling program before we wrap up here? Anything we didn't get to?
I think just the big thing, like we talked about, just knowing what goes in there. Recycling is a really great solution for recyclable materials, but not everything is recyclable. So reducing our usage of those items, so that we don't have to worry about them is really easy. But we have seen, since we started weekly recycling, we've seen an increase in our recycling. So that's great. We know that people are using that service and that's available. So we're really happy to have people participating in recycling.
That's great. And it's great to see the city is rolling out and just making it easier. So weekly pickup with recycling, the composting will be, for everybody,
Mhm.
150,000, you said, up from 30,000. So it sounds like Denver is really moving in the right direction, and there's also some state action we can take to help support
Exactly.
that. So that's great. You mentioned your websites a couple of times. We'll make sure we put those up on a post that we're doing about this. So if you're watching at home, definitely, there's more tools and resources out there for you. Nina, thank you so much for taking so much time to talk with us about this. This is really, I know a lot of people want to be good at this, and so hopefully
Yeah,
this kind of helps them. So yeah, thank you very much for taking the time.
of course. Thanks for having me.
All right,
Anytime.
great. Well, thank you, and check out our website for more information. Thanks, everyone.